Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 5, Columbus, the Admiral of the Oceans, from America's Assignment with Destiny by Manly P. Hall. Columbus, the Admiral of the Oceans. Prevailing historical accounts which deal with the discovery and colonization of the Western Hemisphere must someday be completely revised. Modern scholars have accepted, without proper reflection, a fabrication of lies fashioned to deceive and to prevent the recognition of facts detrimental, even dangerous to the ulterior motives of powerful interests. Time will reveal that the continent now known as America was actually discovered and, to a considerable degree, explored more than 1,000 years before the beginning of the Christian era. The true story was in the keeping of the mystery schools and passed from them to the secret societies of the medieval world. The esoteric orders of Europe, Asia, and the Near East were in at least irregular communication with the priesthoods of the more advanced Amerindian nations. Plans for the development of the Western Hemisphere was formulated in Alexandria, Mecca, Delhi, and Lhasa, long before most European statesmen were aware of the great utopian program. The explorers who opened the New World operated from a master plan and were agents of rediscovery rather than discoveries. Very little is known about the origin, lives, characters, and policies of these intrepid adventurers. Although they lived in a century amply provided with historians and biographers, these saw fit either to remain silent or to invent plausible accounts without substance. Does it not seem remarkable that no one is certain whether Christopher Columbus was actually an English prince, a Greek nobleman, or a Genoese sea captain? Was he granted arms without any examination into his ancestry? Why is it so difficult to ascertain the real name of the man known as Amerigo Vespucci? Who is John Cabot, whose life and exploits are but fragments rather than the somber records of a distinguished citizen? If these men were what they seem to be, there could have been no advantage gained by such elaborate concealment. If there were a mystery, that which was hidden must have been regarded as valuable. Plato described the vast continent of Atlantis, which sank beneath the oceans as the result of a seismic cataclysm. There are several possible interpretations of Plato's account. The lost Atlantis could represent a submerged body of knowledge drowned in the sea of forgetfulness. This would explain and justify Bacon's restoration of the fable, which was nothing more than bringing into light matters long hidden. According to the Critias, the oceans became so agitated and laden with mud and slime that navigation to the west ceased. Sailors feared to go beyond the Pillars of Hercules, towards those Hesperic isles sacred to the mysteries. Even had Christian nations dared to violate the edicts of the secret schools, such audacity would have been held in check by the power of Islam, seated in the Holy House at Cairo, and the Edicts of Lhasa, backed by the arms of the Mongolian Empire. The East agreed to preserve the boundaries of Europe if the European states would bind themselves in a solemn alliance to refrain from exploiting the resources of the Western Hemisphere. Fear of a terrible retribution beyond the walls of Gog and Magog prevented the popes from violating their agreement, and without the leadership of the church, the great families dared not engage in private projects. When the appointed hour came, the secret societies selected their own agents to initiate the program of exploration. Was Columbus then working? Asked Grace A. Findler, either as an individual or as a chosen representative of secret societies, to bring into expression the old utopian ideals and to directionalize them across the seas? Certainly this would go far to explain the charges of traitor, the seizure of all his books and papers, the destruction of all portraiture and likeness, even to the usual mortuary bust and arms, and the complete disappearance of many of his literary works, including the journal of his first voyage and the book of the second voyage. All this would then have been mere inquisitional routine, with the rewriting of his biography, more or less, both of a political necessity and a holy duty. Campanella, in his Civitas Solis, causes a Genoese sea captain to be the guest of the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitallers. When Columbus, on the occasion of his first landfall, raised the standard of Castile, he also planted a banner of his own, consisting of a green cross on a white field. Was this a device of the Knights Templars? 15th century woodcut representing the landing of Columbus on the island of Hispaniola. The formal education of the man who called himself Christopher Columbus has been the subject of much speculation. The navigator wrote in 1501 that during his many voyages to all parts of the world, he had met many learned men of various races and sects, and had endeavored to see all books of cosmography, history, and philosophy, and of other sciences. If the Admiral had seriously endeavored to examine early works on navigation, he undoubtedly had noted the references, brief but significant, by Homer, Solon, Aristotle, Pliny, and other ancient authors to distant lands beyond the great oceans. Plutarch's voyages must have explored vast areas, and Verplanck Colvin summarizes the old accounts thus. In the days of Homer, or rather before his time, navigators traveled thousands of miles out into the Atlantic and back across it. They were guided in their voyages by the stars. One group of authorities consider it probable that Columbus was little better than an illiterate sailor, and that his rudiments of learning were derived from a guild school supposed to have been established by the weavers of the city of Genoa. The opposing faction of historians insists that Columbus possessed considerable scholarship even before his celebrated journey. According to Henry Harris, an outstanding writer on the Columbus mystery, the navigator left 97 manuscripts and over 25,000 marginalia, which may be considered a remarkable achievement for an illiterate. The truth is that the Admiral could not be explained without reference to the secret societies, which were the peculiar custodians of the exact information he required. The religious and mystical inclinations of the great discoverer are mentioned by most of his biographers. At times, Columbus dressed in a plain robe and girdle similar to the costume of the Franciscan order. It was reported by his son that Columbus died wearing a Franciscan frock. It is not known, however, that he was directly associated with the order. Even as a lay brother, several religious groups of the time, including fraternities known to be connected with the esoteric tradition, favored this kind of habit. Perhaps the peculiarities of his costume were overlooked or conveniently forgotten. The Admiral regarded himself as chosen by heaven to fulfill a great mission, and was strengthened by the conviction that he was guarded and guided by the divine providence. Such contemporary reports could imply far more than modern writers would like to acknowledge. In those troublous times, it was customary for the members of secret societies to conceal the true source of their instructions by some general statement about heavenly guidance. The mystical instincts of the Admiral, his belief in miracles, prophecies, and the doctrine of preordination have been advanced by so many critics as proofs of his mental instability, referring to what he calls the colossal, mystical self-confidence of Columbus. John Bartlett Ribner writes that it was so integral a part of the navigator that he could believe on one occasion in voyaging that God had led him to the new heaven and new earth of revelation. And in his darkest hour, he knew that God spoke to him in encouragement. On his third voyage, the navigator believed that he heard the voice of God speaking words of strength and comfort. On his fourth voyage, when great emergencies threatened the entire enterprise, the Admiral fell into a trance and a voice spoke to him. O fool, and slow to believe and to serve thy God, the God of all. What did he do more for Moses or for David his servant than he has done for thee? Columbus may have been a disciple or student of the illuminated Raymond Lully. There is a persistent rumor to this effect. He was also involved with the group perpetuating the political convictions of Dante. The following tribute to the Italian poet is indicative and stimulating. Dante himself was a member of the Albigensian Church, and it is said, for a number of years, officiated as pastor of that powerful organization in various European cities. He was a friend of Roger Bacon and an associate and advisor of powerful leaders in the ancient order of the Temple, which was at the date of his death, while apparently at the summit of its power, actually nearing its disastrous end. Dante is said to have been an initiate of the esoteric doctrines of the Templars. A fragment of writing in the autograph of Columbus showing his cryptic signature. Columbus made use of ciphers and cryptic allegorical expressions and figures of speech. While such ciphers are known to exist in his manuscripts, no systematic effort to decode them has ever come to public attention. Cecil Jane conjectured that Columbus in his cryptic signatures made use of something resembling a Baconian cipher, intended to convey information which could not be directly communicated and to supply the clue to a secret otherwise carefully concealed. Portrait by Vasari. Lorenzo de' Medici, called the Magnificent. Incidentally, the Columbus signature ciphers are extremely reminiscent of the Albigensian papermaker's marks. Seraphim G. Kanounis J.D. of the University of Athens, in his work Christopher Columbus, a Greek Nobleman, attempted to restore the early life of the great discoverer. His findings, calculated to sustain the title of his book, are most illuminating. The secret preparation for the colonizing of the Fortune Isles, or the Blessed Isles of the West, were in the keeping of the Albigenses, the Troubadours, and the chivalric orders of knighthood. The final phase of the exploration project was left largely to the erudition of Lorenzo the Magnificent and the skill of Leonardo da Vinci. Lorenzo de' Medici was a distinguished Platonist, a patron of secret societies, the founder of an important philosophical school, and a subtle advisory of the Borgias. Leonardo was a faithful agent of the great Florentine prince, and one of those men possessed by the spirit of towardness. Although Lorenzo did not live to see the fulfillment of the great plan, he spoke the magic word which opened for Columbus the most extensive institutions in Europe, and invested him with the temporal means for acquiring a measure of consideration for liberal princes and scholars. It was the invisible hand of the Medici that balanced on end the celebrated egg. The conclusions of Columbus concerning the shape of the earth indicate that he was acquainted with the esoteric traditions of Asia and the Near East. He partly revealed the source of his own instructions when he declared the planet to be shaped like a pear, the upper end of which projected towards the sky, like the boss in the center of the shield. The top of this protuberance was the terrestrial paradise, where none could go except by the grace of God. The Admiral noted that this shape coincided with the opinions of certain holy and wise theologians, but he failed to mention the sects or religions to which they belong. The Earth Mountain was certainly the Meru of the Brahmins, and the sacred hill of the Egyptian mysteries. Mount Meru, like Chen Shambhala, Olympus, and the peak described in the Revelation, are all veiled allusions to the invisible government of the earth. Nor should it be assumed that all historical uncertainties center around Christopher Colon, the dove of Genoa. The case of John Cabot is equally curious. There may be more than passing interest in the observations of one research student. When Columbus, in the interim between voyages, disappeared from public view, John Cabot appears and permanently disappears when Columbus reappears. It is easy to forget that John Cabot was really Giovanni Caboto, born in Genoa and a naturalized citizen of Venice. It was especially mentioned that in one of his journeys, Cabot visited Mecca, and like Columbus, was acquainted with the wise men of the Near East. It had even been suggested that he had contacted the religious and political convictions of the secret Christian sect of the Johannites, which played so large a part in the esoteric doctrines of the Templars. Cabot conveniently found the ear of the English king and was immediately entrusted with a delicate diplomatic mission to Denmark to arbitrate disputes over the fisheries of Ireland. Grace Fenderley also notes that the records of the English privy purse shows a pension paid to one Antonio Cabot for several years after John Cabot was historically dead. The pension passed through the hands of an English merchant named Vici di Americi. The voyages of Cabot were important inasmuch as they resulted in a division which gave most of North America to the English group, which was free from the theological and mercenary pressures of the Spanish program. The Great Plan reached the Western Hemisphere through a series of incidents. Many early explorers and colonizers are known to have associated with secret societies. There is no historical way of determining these special spiritual convictions of so-called conquistadors, adventurers, and founders of plantations. It is a well-established fact that arts, sciences, philosophies, and political convictions accompany less valuable merchandise along trade routes and caravan trails. Some of the colonizers were probably unaware of the parts they were playing, and the settlements which they founded remained for generations without the strength or security to advance ideological programs. The work, then as always, was in the hands and keeping of a few initiated leaders. They were responsible for the results, and they built slowly and wisely, thinking not of their own days or of their own reputation, but of the future in which the Great Plan would be fulfilled. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.